world of the hot hatch is, quite frankly, bigger than it's ever been before. You've got all singing, all dancing modern hot hatchbacks like the Civic Type R, 308 GTI, A45 AMG, Golf R, Focus RS, but you've also got a selection of smaller, more affordable hot hatchbacks like the 500 Abarth, the Fiesta ST, the 208 GTI, and also this, the Corsa VXR. The current standard Corsa is already a good car, drives pretty well and looks really good too. So the Corsa VXR is like a Corsa Plus. Basics first of all, the Corsa VXR has a turbocharged 1.6 litre engine with 205 brake horsepower and 207 foot-pounds of torque. 0 to 60 takes 6.5 seconds and the top speed is 143 miles an hour, which, to give it some context, is exactly the same as the Peugeot 208 GTI. Exactly the same performance figures. It goes like an absolute missile. A feeling that's just exaggerated because the car is so small. The wheelbase is short, the body itself is small, so it feels perhaps quicker than it is because it's such a small car, and I really like that. It takes a second for the boost to build at low revs and you've got to wait for the turbo to spool up, but when it does, it just shoots you down the road and it pulls pretty hard almost all the way to the red line. Red line's at 6,500 RPM. It pulls strongly all the way through right up to about 6,000. Because you've got all that low down torque, and also because, I mean, the car weighs pretty much nothing. When you put your foot down on the motorway in 6th gear, for example, it just pushes you forward. You can feel the surge of torque driving you along. You don't really have to change down to get past someone. You do if you're on an A road, of course, but just to gently overtake someone, you don't need to change gear, you can just keep it in 6th. It sounds pretty good as well. It's got a Remus exhaust system and it just burbles nicely at idle when you've just turned the car on. Not so sure the engine sounds particularly nice at high revs because it sounds strained, but the exhaust definitely does. How does it drive? Well, compared to the standard Corsa, you get, of course, the engine, you get bigger brakes, 17-inch wheels, better tyres, upgraded suspension, Coney dampers, and a 10mm lower ride height. But this particular VXR has the VXR Performance Pack, and it's £2,400, but it is totally worth the money. You get a Drexler limited slip differential, the wheels go from 17 inches to 18 inches, you get Michelin Pilot Super Sport tyres, the brakes go from 308mm discs up front to 330mm Brembos, and the Coney dampers are just tweaked slightly to give you even better body control than normal. The differential means that acceleration is alarming, frankly, in such a small car, because it just pulls you out of corners in a way that your mind thinks is impossible. There's more torque steer than I thought there would be. It follows the road a little bit too, but it is very effective, and I think if you didn't go for that VXR performance package and didn't get the differential, you just wouldn't get the most out of the car, particularly in wet conditions. The suspension is hard, but these dampers are brilliant. They are really, really good. There's next to no roll at all, and if you hit a bump mid-corner, it just doesn't seem phased at all. The dampers just soak it up and you keep going. Because the wheelbase is short, it feels very agile. It's a happy mixture between playful and tricky. The brakes are impressive. 330mm Brembo discs on a Corsa is mad, and you'd rarely get close to using their full potential on the road. You'd have to be going very, very quickly to use all of the brakes. In quick road driving, it feels like you can just give them a beating and they'll lap it up. The gearbox is a 6-speed manual, and while I don't like the gear lever itself, it shifts well and the clutch is excellent. This car has got the £160 carbon fibre pack, which gives you carbon wing mirrors and a bit of carbon on the front grille, but because it's £160, it isn't real carbon fibre, so you do not need that. And it's also got tinted rear windows, which are £240. Probably don't need those either, but £550, this pearlescent blue paint, this is the colour I'd get it in. I think that's worth it. Inside it's a little ordinary, but perhaps that's the true way of the hot hatch, to spend the money on the performance rather than sprucing up the interior. But I mean, things like the heater controls, they feel a bit naff. What I do like though is the fact that the instrument cluster is now a special VXR cluster, and also the infotainment system works pretty well, although you don't get sat-nav, which is slightly silly on a car that's 18, 19 or 20 grand, however much you want to spend on it, but you can just pair up your phone and get Apple CarPlay and Maps. But these seats, they are something special. You get cloth Recaros as standard in the VXR, but spend £1,055 on the leather pack and you get these incredible Recaro leather seats, and you get leather in the back as well, and it's worth it. I feel like I'm throwing money around at the spec of this car, but these are definitely worth it. They just make it feel so much more special in here. They look special, they're just gorgeous, and they're very, very supportive. You can get Wi-Fi in here, which is truly one of the greatest things ever. It's £100 for 50 gigabytes, I think, and it lasts for a year or however long until you use up that kind of data. But it is wonderful to have data in your car. It's a very 21st century thing. I must always be connected, but practically speaking, for maps, for stuff like that, it is really, really useful. I just wish that I'd realised that it had data, because in the first few days I had this car, I was doing a lot of travelling, using my phone for maps quite often, and I used 80% of my data in 4 days. Then, on the 5th day, I realised this car had data. Why didn't I realise before? I really like this car. It's expensive if you go a bit mad with the options, and it's brutal in its approach, certainly more brutal than some of the other cars in its class. But it's very technical and a very capable little hot hatch. I've had a lot of fun in this car.